The child's cries echoed through the empty, sterile hallway, bouncing off walls of polished steel. A slender alien figure, its skin a strange mottled blue, cradled the child, struggling to silence her wails. Every cry tightened the knot of unease that grew in the alien's stomach. If they were discovered, all would be lost. But it was too late. Earth had already noticed the disappearance. Meanwhile, on the bridge of the UES Resolute, Commander Eli Carter was staring at a sensor report, his jaw set in a hard line. Earth's most recent diplomatic contact had been with the Zarnathi Collective, a seemingly peaceful coalition of planets, known for their advanced technology and tight-lipped governance. The Zarnathi were allies, or so Earth had believed. Until today. Eli, I think we found something. Lieutenant Sarah Lynn's voice was barely a whisper, tense and simmering with anger. Long-range scans confirm. They have a human child on their base, a toddler. Eli closed his eyes, his hand gripping the armrest of his command chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. A child. An innocent, stolen from Earth's embrace, held captive by an alien race that had sworn friendship. The very thought seared his mind like acid. Prepare the fleet, he ordered, his voice low but unyielding. If they wanted our wrath, they've got it. The fleet mobilized, each vessel gleaming against the darkness, a spear aimed straight at the heart of Zarnathi space. As ships powered up, whispers spread through the ranks, rumors of a child abducted, of trust betrayed. The humans were ready, fueled by righteous anger. For in the minds of those aboard the Resolute, there was no question, Earth's children were sacred. Aboard the Zarnathi station, Raval, the alien holding the child, paced nervously. He had been given orders to study the humans, but he had never imagined it would mean taking one of their young. The toddler looked up at him with wide, tear-streaked eyes, a mixture of curiosity and fear. She reached out a tiny hand, her fingers brushing against his strange, scaly skin, as if seeking comfort. The gesture pierced his resolve. The child didn't see him as an enemy, she couldn't even comprehend what was happening. Guilt coiled within him like a tightening noose. His superiors had assured him this was for the greater good, that understanding humans required sacrifices. But Raval had begun to question who truly bore the cost of this so-called knowledge. Commander Raval, a voice crackled through his comm device. Status update. Has the Earthling been subdued? Raval's voice faltered. Yes, Overseer. The child is unharmed. I have her here. Excellent, the voice replied, devoid of emotion. Prepare her for transit. The collective demands results. Raval swallowed, his grip on the child shifting. Somewhere deep in the void, he felt the rumbling of humanity's approaching fury. His fingers trembled as he ended the transmission. Back on the Resolute, Eli paced the bridge, every step deliberate and charged. The quiet anger in his gaze had spread through the crew like wildfire. Do we have visual on the station yet? He demanded, his tone brooking no hesitation. Yes, Commander, Sarah responded, pulling up the display. We'll be within striking range in 20 minutes. Open a channel to the Zarnathi, Eli ordered. When the display flickered to life, it revealed a council of Zarnathi leaders, their expressions composed and indifferent. Commander Carter, one of them began, his voice carrying a faint edge of irritation, your approach is aggressive. We assure you there is no need for hostilities. We are more than willing to. Save it, Eli interrupted, his voice ice-cold. You have taken one of our children. No diplomatic dance will save you now. You have one chance to release her and face justice, or my fleet will rain fire down upon your base until not even dust remains. The Zarnathi leader's expression faltered for a second, replaced by something closer to fear. But he masked it quickly, clearing his throat. You overestimate your position, Commander. The child was taken for scientific purposes, nothing more. You must understand. Your science does not give you the right to steal our young, Eli shot back. His eyes, hardened by years of duty, were unyielding. This is your last warning. The Zarnathi Council wavered, an uncomfortable silence stretching between them. But before they could respond, alarms blared on the Resolute. The Zarnathi station had raised its shields, and their defenses were coming online, rows of cannons aimed outward, a silent declaration of their refusal to surrender. Eli's gaze turned deadly. "So be it," he murmured, signaling to his crew. "All units, prepare to engage." As the fleet moved into formation, the Resolute led the charge, its weapons primed and ready. Every heart on board beat as one, fueled by an instinct older than any alliance, any truce: protect the innocent, defend one's own. In the Zarnathi station, Raval looked down at the child once more. Her hand still rested on his arm, her face trusting and unafraid. His heart pounded, a war waging within him that mirrored the one about to explode outside. Would he follow orders, or defy everything he'd been taught to save the life in his arms? As the first shots fired, the Zarnathi scientist made his decision. The Zarnathi station loomed ahead, a monolithic fortress of steel and energy, its surface lined with defensive cannons and reinforced shields. Eli Carter stood in the command center of the Resolute, his gaze fixed on the massive station. The air was thick with tension, each officer at their station, silent but alert. No one spoke, words were unnecessary when the battle was already raging. "Commander, shields at full strength. We're ready to initiate offensive," Sarah Lynn's voice cut through the stillness, sharp with determination. "Do it," Eli replied, his voice calm, betraying no emotion despite the storm brewing in his chest. His eyes never left the tactical display as a dozen human warships fell into formation around the Resolute, weapons primed. The Resolute fired first, a blinding flare of energy streaking toward the Zarnathi station. The first shot hit with a resonating crack, the shield shimmering briefly before absorbing the blast. The station trembled but held firm. A moment later, the Zarnathi retaliated, their own weapons lashing out with precision and speed. The Resolute shuddered, its hull vibrating as the shields absorbed the impact, but the ship remained steady. "Direct hit on starboard hull, Commander," reported Lieutenant Jensen from Tactical. "Minor damage, but we're holding." Eli's eyes narrowed. The Zarnathi weren't just defending themselves, they were testing the humans, probing for weakness. But they'd soon learn that Earth's warriors didn't flinch in the face of fire. "Status on the child?" Eli demanded, his mind flitting between the battle and the reason they were here in the first place. A child, one of Earth's own, stolen from her home, and now caught in the crossfire of a diplomatic nightmare. Sarah glanced at the display. "No sign of her yet, Commander. We're scanning for life signs, but the station is heavily shielded." Eli's jaw clenched. "We'll find her, no matter what it takes." A sudden blast shook the Resolute, throwing Eli off balance. He steadied himself, hands gripping the command chair. The Zarnathi had escalated. "Full offensive. Deploy fighter squadrons. We take that station, now." Eli commanded, his voice a hard edge of fury. In an instant, the hangar bays opened, and dozens of sleek fighter crafts shot into space, their engines roaring as they accelerated toward the station. The Resolute's turrets fired in tandem, sending volley after volley of destructive energy at the Zarnathi defenses. The atmosphere crackled with energy as explosions tore through space, a symphony of fire and chaos. On the Zarnathi station, Raval's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the human fleet advance. Their ships were relentless, their tactics merciless. He had underestimated them, humanity's wrath was like nothing he had ever seen. They didn't flinch. They didn't hesitate. They fought with the fury of creatures cornered, and it was clear they would stop at nothing to retrieve their own. "Commander Raval," a subordinate called, voice trembling. "We've sustained significant damage. Shields at 30%. The humans, they're not relenting." Raval's eyes flickered to the child. She was still nestled in his arms, her tiny form wrapped in a blanket, eyes wide but uncomprehending. A pang of guilt pierced him, sharper than any weapon the humans wielded. He knew what they wanted. He knew why they fought. But this wasn't the way. They weren't monsters, at least, not all of them. "Sir," the subordinate urged again. "What do we do?" Raval looked toward the child, her innocent gaze meeting his. It was the turning point. The moment that would define the course of the battle. His orders had been clear, but they had not foreseen this. They had not accounted for the child's humanity, the way her presence stirred something within him. Something he had buried deep. He made his choice. "Prepare a transport," he said, his voice low. "I will take the child to the humans myself." On the Resolute, the battle raged on. The Zarnathi station's shields flickered, weakening with every strike. Eli stood firm, watching the exchange of fire, but his focus never wavered from his ultimate goal. The child. They couldn't let her remain in enemy hands any longer. "Target the main reactor," Eli ordered, pointing to the station's core on the display. "We end this now." The fleet adjusted its focus, and a final, concentrated barrage of fire was unleashed at the Zarnathi station's central reactor. The explosion that followed illuminated the void, a blinding light that stretched out in all directions. The station shook violently, and alarms screamed across the fleet. "Direct hit, Commander." Sarah's voice cracked through the chaos. "Reactor breach. The station's going down." Eli's heart pounded. The mission was almost complete. But something lingered in his mind, an unease that gnawed at the edges of his resolve. He had made his choice. Now, he would pay the price. But as the Zarnathi station shuddered and began to fragment, something unexpected happened. A small transport pod detached from the wreckage, speeding toward the Resolute. Inside, Raval could be seen, holding the child in his arms. The battle paused for a moment, as both sides held their breath. The fate of a stolen child was about to be decided. Eli's voice was steady, but the weight of his words hung heavy in the air. "Prepare to receive the pod. And ready the medics." In that instant, both sides knew the war was far from over, but the first steps toward peace, however fragile, had just been taken. The Resolute hung in the void, the hum of its engines muted against the backdrop of an empty universe. Inside, the command center buzzed with activity, yet there was a strange stillness, as if every officer was waiting for something to break the silence. Eli Carter stood at the observation window, his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the small transport pod now floating toward them. "Commander, the transport is about to dock," Sarah Lynn's voice broke through his thoughts. "We're clear to receive them." Eli nodded, his face set in a grim expression. The battle was over, but the true test had just begun. A Zarnathi officer, the enemy who had been willing to abandon their own to save the human child, was about to step onto his ship. It was an uneasy situation, and he could feel the weight of it pressing down on his chest. "Prepare the meeting room," he said quietly, his eyes narrowing. "And keep the guards alert. I don't trust them." Despite his orders, Eli could feel the uneasy stirrings of doubt in his gut. Could Raval really be trusted? A Zarnathi commander who had led forces to invade Earth just hours ago was now offering the child back, seemingly without a fight. Something didn't add up. As the transport docked and the hatch hissed open, Eli strode toward the meeting room. There, Raval stood with the child in his arms, his expression unreadable. The child, a small girl no older than 5, looked up at him with wide eyes. She seemed calm, almost as if she knew this wasn't an ordinary encounter. Raval's eyes met Eli's, and for a long moment, neither spoke. It was clear the Zarnathi commander wasn't eager to break the silence either. Finally, Eli broke it. "Why?" he asked, his voice low, edged with suspicion. "Why would you give her up? After everything that's happened?" Raval shifted the child in his arms, his gaze flickering briefly to the girl before returning to Eli. "She doesn't belong in this war," he said, his voice thick with something that wasn't quite regret. "She's a child, Commander. She doesn't deserve to be a pawn in a battle that has nothing to do with her." Eli's eyebrows furrowed. It wasn't the response he had expected, and it left him even more uncertain. "You risked your life to bring her here. What do you want in exchange?" "I don't want anything," Raval replied, his tone surprisingly firm. "But I can't keep running, either. The Zarnathi don't trust me anymore. I've already made enemies with my own people." Eli narrowed his eyes. And now you want us to trust you? Raval looked at the child again, his gaze softening for the briefest moment. I never expected that. I'm not asking for trust. I'm asking for understanding. The child shifted in his arms, her small fingers grasping at the edges of his cloak. Eli watched the interaction closely, but his mind was working furiously. If Raval was lying, then this was a brilliant move. If he was telling the truth, then they had an opportunity to break through the Zarnathi's unwavering hostility. Either way, Eli wasn't sure which side he was on, but he knew one thing: the Zarnathi's approach to the war had just changed. We can't simply ignore what you've done, Eli said, pacing slightly, his voice rising with the mounting pressure. Your people are responsible for countless deaths. Earth's fleet won't forget that. I don't expect them to, Raval said evenly. But perhaps it's time for something else. A way to end this war. To prevent more bloodshed. The tension in the room grew thicker, as if the very air had turned to lead. Eli's eyes flicked over to Sarah, who stood silently behind him, her own expression unreadable. The officers nearby watched with growing uncertainty, but Eli held their gaze. He had to make a decision. One wrong move, and they could end up worse off than before. It would be so easy to say no and destroy any chance of peace before it even had time to grow. Do you understand what you're asking? Eli said, his voice sharp now. You want us to trust you, to put aside centuries of distrust, because of one act of mercy? You may not be Zarnathi, but they're your people, Raval. This won't be forgiven so easily. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Raval's voice dropped lower, harder. I'm asking for a chance to do what's right. And I'm asking you to help me. Eli stood still for a moment, the weight of Raval's words pressing in on him. The human instinct to distrust the alien was strong, but something about Raval's plea struck a chord deep within him. Perhaps it was the fact that this was not the enemy standing before him, it was a soldier, much like any human, caught between duty and conscience. The silence that followed stretched on, thick and suffocating, until finally, Eli spoke. Keep the child safe, he said, voice softening. We'll discuss your fate once the situation settles. You'll be under constant guard, Commander, and make no mistake, we're watching you. Raval nodded, acknowledging the fragile trust being offered. He shifted the child in his arms, who gazed up at him with the same wide-eyed innocence as before. Thank you, he whispered, though whether it was directed at Eli or the child, neither man knew. As Eli watched him leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that the war had just taken a sharp turn. A turn neither side was ready for. The morning after Raval's surrender dawned gray and cold, with thick clouds hanging low over the horizon. The Resolute drifted in deep space, its engine hum now a steady pulse under the feet of the crew. The silence that had followed the meeting the previous evening hadn't lifted, and Eli Carter could feel it pressing down on him. There was unease in the air, the kind that gnawed at your insides, making you question every decision, every choice. Eli paced the command center, his boots clicking sharply against the metal floor. He had spent the night running through every possible scenario, every angle. But none of the options seemed clean. Raval's offer, his defection, could it be genuine? Or was it a trap? Commander, the Zarnathi fleet is still in range, Sarah Lynn reported from her station, her fingers flying over the console. She was the most level-headed officer he had, but even her voice held a thread of doubt. They haven't moved, but they've been monitoring us. Eli's jaw tightened. He'd expected nothing less. Raval's betrayal, if that's what it was, would be a festering wound in the Zarnathi's ranks. They wouldn't let it go without consequences. I'm aware, Eli said, rubbing his temple. I don't trust it. If Raval's playing us, we won't see it coming. The Zarnathi will be in position to strike before we even know they're there. Sarah glanced up at him, her eyes searching. You think he's lying? About the child? I think we're dealing with an alien species whose entire culture is built on warfare and deception, Eli said, voice low but firm. We've been outmaneuvered before. We can't afford to be complacent. At that moment, a soft chime echoed through the room, breaking the tension like a glass shattering. Eli turned, his stomach twisting when he saw Raval standing in the doorway. The Zarnathi commander, though stripped of his armor, still carried the weight of his past in every movement. His eyes, however, were not the cold, calculating eyes of the invader who had led countless battles. They were uncertain. Haunted, even. "Commander Carter," Raval's voice was deep, almost weary. He stepped into the room, the child still cradled in his arms. The girl had fallen asleep, her small form relaxed against him, oblivious to the storm brewing around them. "What do you want, Commander?" Eli asked, his words clipped, his suspicion evident. Raval's gaze flicked to the child. He didn't immediately speak, as if weighing his words carefully. When he finally looked up, there was something new in his expression, a vulnerability that hadn't been there the night before. "I've made my decision," he said slowly, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of resolve. "The war. I can't be part of it anymore." Eli's eyes narrowed. "And why should I believe you? What's stopping you from turning us into the Zarnathi's next target?" Raval didn't flinch, but his grip tightened on the child, as if the girl were the anchor that kept him from losing himself entirely. "I have nothing left to lose," he said quietly. "I turned my back on my people. And now, I'm asking you to do something difficult." Eli crossed his arms, leaning back against the wall. He wasn't ready to let his guard down. "What's that?" "To end the war." Raval's voice was quiet, yet the weight of his words struck Eli like a blow. "You have the power to end this. Together, we can push back the Zarnathi forces, force them to surrender." Eli blinked, stunned by the audacity of the suggestion. "You want me to trust you, someone who just a day ago was leading the charge against Earth, so you can end the war?" "I'm not asking you to trust me," Raval answered firmly. "I'm asking you to use what we know about their strategies, about their weaknesses, and turn it back on them. We know their fleet is divided. I know their weaknesses, their tactics. If we strike fast, we can cripple them." Eli's mind raced. Raval's offer was tantalizing, even logical. A decisive strike could change everything. It could give humanity the upper hand, secure Earth's safety. But the risk was enormous. A wrong move could mean their annihilation. "You're asking for a lot," Eli said, his voice hoarse as he tried to steady his thoughts. "You want us to act on intelligence you've given us. But I can't ignore the possibility that you're playing both sides. That you're luring us into a trap." "I understand your suspicion," Raval replied quietly. "But I'm asking for the chance to prove myself. To help you." Eli looked at the Zarnathi commander, then to the child, still sleeping soundly in his arms. Raval's motives remained unclear, but there was something about his actions, the way he was protecting the child, that struck a chord in Eli. Could a warrior so entrenched in bloodshed truly change? The room was heavy with silence as Eli weighed the decision in his mind. The tension was suffocating, and Eli could feel the pressure of time bearing down on him. They couldn't afford to wait much longer. A decision had to be made. "You have one chance," Eli said finally, his voice like steel. "If you're lying, if this is a trap, I will end it myself. But if you're telling the truth, then we fight together." Raval nodded, his expression solemn but grateful. The child shifted in his arms, unaware of the fragile alliance forming in the room. Eli turned to Sarah, his voice firm. "Prepare the fleet. We move out in 2 hours." As the doors hissed shut behind Raval, Eli couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the true battle, one of trust, was only just beginning.